Privacy rules are really easy to ignore when you're first learning Bubble. After all, you just want to build an application, right? You're worrying about what pages there are and all the different data types. You don't want to be worrying about these technical security implications. But the fact of the matter is you just can't launch an app without understanding privacy rules. And they're really not that difficult once you understand how they work. So you might have seen that they live here in this little tab, but not quite understood exactly how they work. So I just want to demonstrate to you what an app without privacy rules looks like, and then we'll add some privacy rules and see how the behavior of our application changes. So we'll just create this really simple repeating group here. And we'll set the source to be a user, and we'll just do a search for all of the users in the database and populate this text with the current user's email. Now, we don't actually have any users in the app yet. I've already dragged in this header, so I'll just create one. Okay, so I'll just speed run this and create a couple of users. Okay, so now we have these couple of users here. Now, let's say for the sake of argument, okay, we have another field on the user that is some sensitive data, okay? Some sensitive data, and I'll just manually, for these two users, add in the sensitive data. Okay, now you might think, since we're not actually showing that sensitive data in this repeating group, no problem, right? It's not actually being shown there. We don't have a text field that's displaying that sensitive data. Well, you would be wrong. This is why privacy rules are so important. See, if we go and inspect this by clicking inspect down here or going Control-Shift-I, and then we go over to this network tab, we actually have the ability here to see all of the data that is being retrieved from our Bubble database. Okay, and as we'll see, that's more than is just being displayed on this page. So I'll just refresh the page so we can see this in action. Okay, now this XHR, that's a filter for all of the requests that are being made to the server. Now, if we come down here and we look at this mSearch, this actually is capturing what our application has requested from the server and what the server has returned. Okay, now just quickly sketch that up as well. Our application is sitting all the way over here. Okay, this is our app. And here is the server. Now, in technical terms, this app here is actually our client. This is the computer that the user is viewing the app on, okay? But I'll just use the term app and client interchangeably. Now, the app has a little bit of programming in it that is requesting certain data from the server. In our case, right, we're looking for users. We're actually doing a search for users. So that's what this mSearch is actually responding to. This mSearch is the do a search for that we programmed in the Bubble interface, okay? So we're doing that search, right? It's asking for some users. And the server, right, where the database lives, okay, here is actually where the database lives, is going to send back the users that it finds. The problem is that it sends back those users in their entirety by default. If there's some sensitive data hidden in one of these users, it's also being returned to the server. So yeah, we're getting the email of that user, okay? We're also getting that sensitive data. That's being returned to the application, even if the application isn't actually displaying it on the page. So it actually is now available within the user's browser, okay, within the client. Let me show you how that works. This msearch, which is this package here that's been returned from the server, actually contains, if we go into all of these nested groups here, all of the users that have been returned. So here we've actually got the 2 users, these 0 and 1. And if we go in, we can see all of the information about that user, including that sensitive data, even though that's not been displayed anywhere on the page. So this is obviously a really bad security breach. I mean, this isn't a very difficult thing to do. Without, having much knowledge, I've been able to access the sensitive information contained in this user. So how do we solve that? Well, privacy rules cut off the problem here on the server. See, it almost acts like a filter, right? This is the privacy rule filter. And it won't return any information about a user that we've told it not to, okay? We can actually filter out this sensitive data so that it isn't actually included in this package right here. So how do we do that? We go into the privacy rules tab. So under the privacy tab is where you define the rules that determine how this filter works, okay? How this privacy rule filter works. So you define it in the context of each data type, okay? So we're talking about users now, so let's define the privacy rule for a user. The privacy rules are embedded within roles, okay? And I'll show you exactly how that works. Let's say we want to restrict all sensitive data for any user that isn't the currently logged in user. That is to say, if I'm logged in as Matt in the application, then I should be able to see all of the data associated with my account, but I shouldn't be able to see any of the data associated with anybody else's account, okay? So let's call that rule or that role the current user. And we can define it as when this user, i.e. the user in question, the user who we're determining whether or not we should have access to their data, when this user is the current user, which is the currently logged in user, okay, then we can view all of their fields, we can find them in the searches, we can see any files attached with them, and here we also have the option to allow or disallow auto binding for that user. I can deselect this view all fields and select particular fields that I want to show, and maybe I'll say that we want to see their email, their sensitive data. Hell, let's just see all of their fields. And if I'm not that user, then this is the filter, the privacy rule filters that will apply. So actually we've got no fields selected. We're still allowed to find it in searches, and we're still allowed to view attached files. So that's just like the default. So let's just see how that actually behaves. Now remember, I'm currently logged in as Matt2, and this is Matt1, just for shorthand. So Matt2 is appearing here in this repeating group, Matt1 is not. If we jump back into DevTools and look at this msearch again, then I'll jump down into the nested hits here. Okay, we're still getting 2 users returned, but you'll notice that there isn't any information about this user. For this user, which is Matt2, we actually have all of that information, that sensitive data, because in fact, we are that user, and the privacy rule is letting that data filter back from the server. You'll notice we can still see the ID of that user, and that's because we're still doing a search for the users, and we haven't actually removed that find this in searches. We could do that and then refresh this page. And now this msearch is actually only returning one user, and that is Matt2, the one that we're currently logged in as, right? We could say, okay, actually no, well, you can find it in searches, of course, and we can show the email, but I don't want to show any sensitive data, right? That might be useful if you're trying to show a user, a list of, possible friends that they could add to their account, right? You want to be able to see some basic identifying information. So now Matt.in is filtering through and looking at what's actually being returned from the server. We can see that for Matt1, we have some information, we have the email, but we don't have that sensitive information now being returned. Let's look at another rule really quickly so we can see this in a little bit more context. Let's say we want to define another rule for users, and we'll call this one trusted users. For this to work, we're going to have to set up another field on our user data type, and we'll call that trusted users. And we'll set it to be a list of users. So we'll create that, and we'll say that we'll actually, for our Matt.n+2 who we're logged in as, we'll actually add him as a trusted user for Matt1. So there's Matt2. And now let's set up a privacy rule that says when the current user, or rather when this user's trusted user contains the current user, then we'll just give them all the same permissions that we would have if we were logged in as that original user. Now you'll notice I stumbled a little bit there. I started with current user. I'll just clear this. When the current user, now what would I choose there? Privacy rules don't give you the same degree of flexibility when you're creating these formulas, when you're creating these programmed rules. I don't have a current user is in rule here. I only have an is or is not. So sometimes you have to create relationships between your data that allow you to create the rules that you want. So if you can't quite find the right formula to create the rule that you want to, then go back to your database and create some new relationships, like a list of users perhaps, or a list of X that you want to, a list of X on Y. Add a text that says sensitive data contains the current user. That's the only way I can write this expression. And then I can view all fields. So if I view this again, then in this msearch now, I should have the full suite of data, indeed I do, for this user, Matt1. One last thing to note. If you're struggling to find out why something's not behaving properly in your app, why some data or why some element isn't showing the right data, or a search isn't working, or something like that, quite often in my experience, the problem lies in a privacy rule, which is actually restricting some data that your app is expecting. So you want to get used to using the debugger for that kind of thing. If I log out right here, and current users sensitive data, and I'll just refresh the page. Right, as a logged out user, I'm not seeing anything here. And if I actually go into the debugger tab and inspect, then I can see this message here, which is letting me know what information, what data, what fields are being filtered out at the level of the database that are not being returned to the user's browser. Okay, so that marks the end of our quick little setup phase with the database and the privacy rules. Now we can actually start building our app pages.